Hello, and welcome to yet another episode of the Scalable Multiplayer Game Design live stream with Red Hat here. Today I'm joined by Roderick Kieley, whose
folks.
name I think I pronounced correctly today.
Yes, indeed.
Yes. Michael Clayton. And man, we're still not getting the audio from you. And Jared Sprague. Sprague?
Hello. Sprague,
Sprague?
like plague.
Okay, that's not where I was expecting that one to go, but sure. So while Michael unfortunately is fighting with his audio, does anybody remember what we talked about last time? I think I thought we did do the config stuff, but I guess we didn't. So what did we do last time?
I think I spent a lot of time talking about networking updates. I'm pretty sure.
Oh yeah.
And we briefly mentioned the config stuff.
Okay, but we didn't
Jared
really
did a
get
great
into
job
it.
on that. But we didn't dig in because Jared wasn't here.
So Jared, you had said that you were willing to sacrifice yourself to the demo gods to show some of the config stuff. So why don't you take over and maybe share your screen and get after some of that?
Sure. Yeah, I won't take up too much time, but I will share some stuff. Yeah. So let me share my screen here. Host disabled.
Oh, of course. Why would it be any other way? Security, share screen. There you go. It should be available now.
Got it. And I probably need to share my entire desktop because I got terminal and browser. So
I see it.
All right, everyone see. Okay, so let me get started here. So I'll turn off let me make my browser a bit bigger because I've widescreen makes everything look small, but I'll make it bigger. All right, so let me just explain a little bit. So before I did that, I added an enhancement to the game server that allows us to put config variables into a config file, which changed often, because before that, we had some values hard-coded in the code, which would mean if you wanted to change some things, you actually had to change it in the source code and then do a rebuild of the C++ server, which
that's not
is
fun.
a lot. Yeah, it's a lot, especially when you're just trying to debug stuff, right? And you want to change values and see it immediately show up. So that's what I tackled, and using YAML. So I found a library for C++ called CPP YAML, which is really, really easy, great library. And I kind of did a refactoring of the code. So we had a bunch of the config stuff in the the main launcher file, which I moved into kind of consolidated into a config class, which includes, and so now the variables that you want to use to change the way the game behaves can be done through these different methods. So you can still put it in a command line. You can put in a command line argument, and the ones that were hard coded before I extracted out. So they could either be a command line argument or put into values in the config file. And then
very cool.
If you leave them out, they all have defaults, and here's the list of defaults here. So let me show a quick example of that. So here's I'll clear the screen, but here's the game server. So actually, here's the config file. So we got the broker URI endpoint, the sleep cycle, which is really the game tick, the milliseconds that how often the game loop runs, and then the queues for the broker queues that they go into. So the game in queue and the event out, and then the force multiplier. So we don't have a lot of variables yet, but this will get a lot bigger as the game grows.
Potentially, yeah.
Anything that can change, number of bots we want to put in, or what, so many things. And then you can change how the game behaves by just changing some values in the file. So right now, this is the default every 2 milliseconds. So if I run the server right now, well, first of all, you can see there's hardly any command line arguments because it's pulling it. Before, this was a really long command to start the game server, but now it's just running every 2 seconds. If I go over to the client, and if I try to move, it's gonna move very slowly because it's like every 2 seconds it moves just a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, that's not very good because it's so slow. So to fix that, now instead of doing a rebuild of the code, now all I have to do is like come into this config file and be like, okay, let's make the force multiplier like 100,000 and make the server tick 50 milliseconds and see what that does now. Run it again and refresh the client. And now it's like, whoa, boom. Now it like moves right away. And you can see how smooth it is because it's a 50 millisecond server tick, and you know the positions are lerped between ticks, so it looks really smooth. And the force multiplier seems to be, and well, I guess that's the whole demo pretty much, just showing like just by changing the values in the config file and refreshing the client, you get immediate results of testing stuff out. So that's it really.
Very cool.
Yeah.
That certainly makes life easier.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
And so one of the things that we had sort of realized was, we can, so actually, if you want to show your screen again,
Yeah, sure.
since you have it up, if you start the game, or if you like restart the server,
Mhm.
and then join with one browser tab, or just refresh or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And then join in the other browser.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody starts at 0, which
Oh, yeah.
definitely doesn't work. Like now the players are quite literally on top of each other.
Right.
And in some cases,
You can see them. Like,
yeah, now you actually ended up
Ooh.
with a third player.
Yeah, I end up with a third one somewhere. But
So
yeah.
yeah, this is bad, right? So we need to sort of somewhat randomize the player position, and there's no way to quit the game right now. So like if you just close one of your browsers, the server has no timeout, and the client is just like, okay, later, and like nothing actually happens.
Yeah.
So I did some hacking around to try and fix some of these things. Also, the way that we're applying forces to the spacecraft, like when you press the left or the right arrow, it simply moves left and right. You can't actually rotate the ship. And so I tried to figure out with Box2D, like how to do some of those things.
Do you have a
Yeah.
demo to show?
I certainly don't have a good demo to show, but I
Okay.
will do my best to make something work here.
Let me
Let's see,
stop
share
sharing
screen.
then.
I want
While
to
you're setting
share
that up, can you
desktop.
guys hear me now?
Yeah.
We can. Welcome.
Cool.
You have made it.
Zoom has
Sure.
trouble with using system defaults.
All right. Can you all see my tiny little text here?
Yes.
Yeah, looks good.
Okay.
Yes.
Make my text a little bigger.
It's not as big as the
So what do we want to start with? So one of the interesting things was, we'll start with the quit button because that's like the easiest thing. And so, because we're using phaser, we have a bunch of scenes, and then we start with this initial like preload scene. And so what I did was I just took the font awesome like X circle PNG and just downloaded that to make it a sprite. And so then we preload it, and then when the main scene is opened, we add that X in the upper right hand corner. I was trying to figure out how to actually make the button pressing do starting a scene. And so I found some random post on Stack Overflow that was like, oh, it's actually the scene property of the scene. It lets you start the scene. I don't know, whatever. You can read the post in there by looking at the link in the code. But that gives you a button that actually does the thing. And so if I npm start here, it'll open, of course, the wrong browser, but here's the browser. And you see this little X button. I don't have a server or anything running right now, so there's no player to come up. But if I click the X, what it's going to do is send a leave message and then switch to like a quit scene, which right now is empty and does nothing. But here's where we could put, credits or whatever.
Mhm.
One of the things that we're trying to figure out how to do is make it so that when you close the browser tab, that it does the same thing, like sends an actual leave message to the server. But that was one of the sort of minimal things that I worked on. So we have a quit button now.
Yeah, this is awesome. I'll just say, like, can you talk a little bit? Like, one thing I'm really curious about is how did you figure out the right format of the message to send to remove the player from the
Oh,
server?
so yeah, it didn't take a whole lot to figure out. So in the code, we already have the protobufs that define the message
Mhm.
types that we send. And so we already have this security command buffer. And when you send a security command buffer message, there's two types. There's a join type and a leave type.
Hmm.
And so we were already consuming a join message somewhere.
In the AMQP client, probably.
Oh yeah, right. So if we look at the AMQP game client, we were already consuming the join message. So let me look through here. So on a game event message, we have this callback.
Mhm.
And then if there's a message body, we decode an event game buffer. And then we look at the event type. And then we already had this like security game event buffer type.
Mhm.
And we already had a way to send the join message to like construct it as a join. Right. So here's the security command buffer that is type 1, which is join. So to do the leave, I was just like, oh, okay, well, that's type 2. So I just copy pasta the
Mhm.
join into this leave function. And we should probably actually implement a send join function if we wanted to be super pedantic.
Yeah,
But it's the
probably.
same exact thing. It's the same exact thing, just type 2. So we send our UUID and type 2, and the server is like, cool, I got a leave message. I'm going to delete your player entity.
So that's all the server needs to know, like, about a player is its UUID.
Today,
Okay.
I mean, we probably want to implement some kind of stronger authentication.
You can kick other.
Yes.
Yeah, so that you can't like hack your way into deleting other players. Which reminds
be
me,
a
so a
fun game in its own
million years
right.
ago, huh? Go ahead, Derek.
Could be a fun game in its own right, but
Well, so funny thing, a million years ago, I used to be a bulletin board kid, and so there was a local bulletin board that was based on the Galacticom software. I don't know, had 12 lines or something like that, and there was a chat room, and there was a text-based brawl game where it was like an old Western, like you could have a shotgun or a revolver, or like stick of dynamite or whatever. And so when you would play this game, and this was in the days of like 2400 and 9600 baud modems, and a lot of people used this modem connection software called Telemate. And so when people were playing the chat game, the brawl chat game, if somebody grabbed the stick of dynamite and lit it, it would explode within a certain period of time. And so the goal was you would hang on to the dynamite as long as possible and then throw it. And so what people figured out is that if you private chat joined with somebody and then fired off a telemate macro that sent a bunch of backspace characters, you could basically flood the other person's modem and like it would disconnect. And so you would private chat somebody who grabbed the dynamite and then backspace flood them and then boot them off the server, and then the dynamite would blow up in their hands and then they would lose. Anyway, I don't know why that came to my mind when we're talking about this join and leave command, but yeah, anyway. Because you could just like randomly,
Yeah.
delete other players. from the game.
Security. Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll have to come up with some mechanism of, like something you have and something that, only you can delete yourself, your session or whatever. But yeah, it was way simpler than it might have seemed, because it was just changing the type of an existing message.
I mean, that kind of thing has not changed, right? Like games still have that today. Like not that like just weird stuff that you can do like that.
Oh yeah, like flooding and
Yeah.
all kinds of
Right.
stuff.
People
Yeah.
Especially
looking for
multiplayer
those.
games are,
People are always looking for stuff. Yeah.
yeah.
So that's the leave. So that's pretty trivial.
I have,
And
one
then
question before we move to the next.
yeah, go for it, Michael.
Are other players' UUIDs available? Like if you go around
Yes,
and
they
then
have to
leave?
be,
Okay.
because we need to know which player comes in and then what happened to that player, like what is their current position, what is their rotation, and so on and so forth. And so if we look at the actual main scene and we look at the game loop, actually no, we'll start here. So when a message comes in from the game server, we decode the message as something. And so if it's a player did something, that comes in as a entity game event buffer, which has like a position and a rotation and a whatever. So when we look at process entity game event, all we do is we check if we already knew about that player. If we didn't know about them, we initialize them, again, using the UUID. Otherwise, we just update the player array from the UUID. And then in the game scene on every tick, what we do is we just iterate over all the players that we know about. And then we update their state. Either we initialize them if we didn't have a sprite for them already, or we just update whatever their sprite was. And what you can see here is I added this to destroy thing. So when we have the leave message, or I should say when we receive a leave message, so we process the security game event. If we look at the security game event, if it was a leave message, we do a player destroy. All player destroy does is
It's gonna remove them from the array of players, probably.
it marks them for deletion.
Yeah. Oh, right, of course. Yeah.
So here's the player destroy function. And so all we do is we mark them as to destroy true.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the game loop, if we encounter a player with to destroy is true, we reap the player by using Phaser's destroy method on the physics group for that particular player's object.
Mhm.
And then we delete them from the list of players that we know about. Because if we didn't do this, then we accidentally reinitialize them on the next go around, because it's like, oh, we found a player that we don't have a sprite
Mhm.
for.
Yeah.
It's not what you want to do. So yeah, that takes care of effectively nuking the player. So I think, Michael, that answers your question about, do we know everybody's UUID?
Yeah. It makes me wonder if a really simple solution to the security problem would be, you have one UUID like this one that's just for identifying players, tying them to their sprites, and everyone receives those. And then there's a secondary like security UUID that's only issued to the player that it belongs to. And that's what you use to leave. And so then
Yeah,
other
we could
players
probably
have
generate
security
some
background.
like 5 or 6 digit token
Yeah.
that gets sent to the client once the player joins, like, hey, we're acknowledging your join.
Right.
This is your special token that you need to, remove yourself later or whatever.
I mean, heck, you could just use JWTs, right? JSON Web Tokens.
Well, that's actually what I
Industry
want to
standard.
do if you think back to the early days of the stream, when I showed some of the chat lobby stuff using Red Hat single sign-on. And so we were already using JWTs for that. And so my thought was that when the player goes from the game lobby into the game client, that we would use their JWT to basically identify who they are. And so you would send the JWT to the server when you're joining. The server would validate your JWT against Red Hat single sign-on. And so then when you send a leave message, it would be the same thing. Like, does this JWT match who you are logged in as? And if it does, okay, cool. We'll delete you. We'll leave you. Yeah, man, Michael, I don't know why Zoom is bad about gain, but
Yeah.
unfortunately
Hopefully my level's a little better now.
it's better.
Yeah.
Just scream.
Can hear
Just
you.
yell. And so you can see here, I started to try and add some text, but I couldn't figure out the next step to actually put text on the player in Phaser. But yeah, anyway. Anybody have other questions about the client?
Um,
We'll switch to some of the server changes that I made. Server changes. So what you saw when Jared was playing with his character, you press the up button, the thing moves up. You press the right button, it moves directly to the right. There's no rotation. And like in a space game, normally you would like rotate and then your thrust is applied in the direction that your spacecraft is traveling. So there's a whole bunch of things that we sort of had to do that I had to do to make that work. And so if I look at some of the changes here, oh, this is only going to be the changes. I want to compare the active file against, oh God, what did I just do? Okay, that did nothing. I want to look at like many of the changes, but that might be, oh, wait, let's see. If I do this and yeah, there we go. Updated US blocks. Haha, okay, cool. So what you can see here are a bunch of, what? No, I want to, that's not fun. I want to change, compare this one. There we go. Okay, cool. So the way that we had it before, and again, we're using Box2D for the physics engine under the cover. So firstly, our player was a shape of a circle, which like, I mean, spaceship is kind of like a cigar shape. It's not really a circle. We were using a specific circle shape. We were applying force directly to the center of the object. And so left just moved you to the left and right moved you to the right. So what we need to do is we need something that's like cigar shaped, that has the appropriate mass, and that we apply force in the correct ways. And so one of the things I did was I changed it to be a box. We had talked on the stream previously, I think maybe 2 episodes ago, we were gonna have a ship that was about 300 meters long, and I arbitrarily guessed at 60 meters wide. And so when you use set as box with Box2D, you actually are using the half values. And so if the size we wanted was, oh, sorry, I did that totally, I lied. It's 150 meters long and 20 meters wide. So I took half of that as 10 and 75. Note that Box2D uses metric units by default. It's actually unitless by default, but it tells you to think about things in metric units. And so it's like kilograms, meters, seconds, that kind of stuff. So this is a cigar that is 20 wide and 150 long. The way that Box2D calculates the mass of an object is rather bizarre. You don't actually set the mass, you set the density, and then it uses the area of the object and the density to calculate the mass. So I just did some simple backwards math and I said, well, we had decided that we wanted the spaceship to have a mass of 20,000 kilograms, which who knows if that's a reasonable number or whatever. But to go backwards into a mass of 20,000 kilograms, it was basically 20 times 150, 20,000 divided by 20 times 150, which gives you 6 2/3 as the density. So this is the density. And when the fixture gets rolled up into the body. So box 2D uses this concept of you have a body that's made up of multiple fixtures that can be attached to each other in different ways. When it rolls up the density of the fixture and the shape of this particular fixture, which there's only one fixture right now, you get a mass of 20,000 kilograms or 20,000 units, which are kilograms. So then we had to figure out how we were going to handle the forces. And so I found another Stack Exchange post that talked about how to move a box 2D object in the direction that it's facing. And so if you think about the ship, if it's facing up and you apply thrust, it should go up. But if it's facing at an angle and you apply thrust, it shouldn't go up. It should go in this direction, like the direction that it's facing. And so the way that you do that is somewhat stupidly and obviously in hindsight using trigonometry. And so you take the angle of the object from 0 and you apply the cosine times the thrust value, and that gives you the x vector of the thrust, and then you take the sine of it to get the y vector of the thrust, and so that gives you how much force is being applied in the appropriate vector. And then we multiply that by our force multiplier, because that is what we're trying to figure out, like, oh, what should the starting thrust be? It's a config object, whatever. And then we can just apply that force to the center of the object. Like, we theoretically should apply it to the end of the object, but it kind of doesn't matter, like, because it's a single object right now, whether you apply the force at the center or at the end, it's still gonna theoretically achieve the same goal. Maybe it wouldn't, but whatever, we'll go with it for now. And then turning left or right should really be applying a torque to the body. And this is, I think this is not the way we want to do this. I think we actually need to apply a force to the end of the ship. Or we have to figure out, like, theoretically where the rotational thrusters are.
I think
Huh?
that's correct. Yep. Yeah, and that'll change over time too as the pod picks up.
Yeah.
picks up
So
debris and whatever
this
else,
works very badly right now, only in the sense that it's way slower than the thrust, which I don't understand why. My assumption is that the torque, wherever the torque is being applied to the body, it's like, you ever try to open a door from the hinge? Like, it's really hard. It doesn't work. But you try
Don't
to
do
open
it.
the door from the end, it's like, zoom, it just opens up. And so I think this apply torque, I have to look at the definition of where that's actually being done. But this does actually work. There was a backwards thing in the game client that I just fixed on my end. So we were like, I would press right and the ship would go forwards, and it's like, that's the X and the Y, or the backwards. So if I try and do, and then the last thing was, how do we get the player to not start at 0 all the time? And so we have this creation thing where when a new player comes in, we add their pod. And so we create a box 2D entity. So we have like regular server entities that have their own metadata, and then we have box 2D entities that are like attached to them. So we have our pod, which then has a box 2D pod that's associated with it. And all I did was I used the random that came into C++11, but it's actually not particularly random. Like, I think it's the same random number every time, whatever. So we need this to be a little more random, but it does work. The second player is not in the same position as the first player.
It probably needs to be seated or something of that nature.
Yeah, but then if you seed it, like, you'll still get the same order of random numbers. So like,
normally
we need better
the current system time or something like that.
Yeah, we need some more randomness, variation there. But we do legitimately get, players that end up in different positions. And like, I added a whole bunch of more barfy log messages about, hey, look, this is what the actual mass is. Here's the inertia, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So if I debug the server, And I'm just gonna run at log level 1 because we don't really care about the log messages. And if I then, oh gosh, oh, sorry, my keyboard went to sleep. And now it has to reconnect to my laptop. There we go. Okay, game server's running. Where's a good browser tab? Let's do this. All right, so we'll do localhost 3000. And what we see is our player starts over there. And if I press the right arrow and hold it down, it's gonna take forever, but you can see it's rotating. You see it rotating?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Not straight. And now if I press up, it should go in the direction that it's pointing, but it's going backwards. So that's sort of bad. So now would be, there's some number problems here. But if I keep pressing right and up, it should sort of go in a circle-ish. And it's like kind of doing that, but not really. So clearly like it's doing more or less something in the general vicinity of what it should be doing. It's totally doing
But
it
it's not quite
wrong.
right.
Yeah, but you know, this is prototyping, right? So it looks like we've got some digits backwards. And so one of the challenges I was having was like, we were talking about this before the stream. If I come into the server and I set a breakpoint on, oh gosh, come on. If I set a breakpoint in the update and the force calculation stuff, so we'll set the breakpoint here, right? So here's a breakpoint. If I go into the debug console, we've got our, yeah, so all we have is a this, and it's like, I'm bad with trying to debug C++. So we've got this body, which is the thing that we applied the torque to, but so I can do something like, you know, this dot m pb2 body, and that'll give me the right object, but I can't actually use any of the functions that that exists because I'm in weird C++ debug land and it's not a REPL or whatever. So it's like, well, how do I actually get the angle of the thing if it's not like, so if it's not one of the variable objects like on the thing, then I actually have to go and look at the definition of this function to figure out like how to do the thing. I don't know. I'm not good at debugging C++. But anyway, I did a thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like, there's a bunch of stuff you covered, man. Like,
Yeah.
I have a few questions. So
Yeah. Ooh, segfault. Yay.
oh yes. So, first one with the picking a random position.
Yes.
Keep it from hitting the like log at the same person. But there's always a chance that you will have, if it's just random, like that, you will end up getting a spawn point on top of another player.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
is
So
there a like distance function where you can be like, you know, am I too close to another player? Just like and if so, let me pick another point to.
yes, but no. And so right now, this function, and Roddy, you might understand more. This function only takes a UUID as an input, but what we could do is in the sorry, I have to find handle join security command executed event and then game buffer and queue. I gotta find, so basically like in the place where we call add pod. Oh, I could have just done that like this. Sorry. I'm not the C++ genius here. A entity add pod, go to references.
Yeah, if you look at the structure of a entity, which is like the
Yeah,
abstract entity class, it keeps a track in a list of all the pods.
the whole class keeps track.
Yeah, that's right, because it's basically
Always?
a parent. Yep. Yeah, there's a static member in the parent class which keeps track of all the instances of entities as they're added. So if you look at a entity.h line 68, or in the vicinity anyway, scroll up a little bit. There you go. So there's a list of pods there that's private, right? So like we could add a function to the parent class that loops through the list of instances of entities, in this case pods, and grabs their location and calculates distances based on that, right?
Yes,
And then that way
Well,
we can ensure there's no overlap.
that's what
yeah,
we're-
it would be a little bit more, not to like, I guess I am totally nitpicking, to nitpick a little bit. It's a little more complicated than that, because what we would do is we would look at the list. And so the first player can be random. The second player, we would then apply some kind of distribution function to basically like equidistance new players from all other players kind of thing. So instead of trying to be random, like we would be more mathematical about it, if that makes any
You
sense.
could do that, but I would vote for just keeping it simple. All players start at a random position, and you just generate a random position. Make sure it's not too close to anybody.
Yeah.
If it is too close, you just run it
Generate a
again.
new random position.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we do with Orbio. Like I sent you the function for that. That's the algorithm we use pretty much to pick a random position, and we have a minimum distance that if you're below that, it picks another random position, and if it tries that, then we have the only other thing is we have like a retry limit, so it doesn't get into an infinite loop. Like if it
Yeah,
tries-
and that's
if it tries like 10 times, it'll just go with
right.
the last one.
I don't think so. While what I described sounds complicated, it's probably been solved like a million times, and there's probably just a straight
Probably.
up like mathematical theorem that says here's how to like, equally distribute something, in a 2D whatever. And I'm sure there's probably already like an example C++ implementation of it. So I don't think it's going to be that hard to do, because a lot of these like path walking type things are well known.
Right. So then the question is that a good gameplay thing to do, right? Like, what do you think, Eric? If you're going to start a game and you're jumping in as a new player, do you like the idea of knowing exactly where you might land because it'd be equally distributed, or would you prefer a randomized distribution?
Well, so a couple things, equidistant doesn't mean the same every time. It just means that whatever the distance value is, that's my guarantee from every other player. So we could randomize the distance within some window. And so like, you're gonna be at least this far away from another player kind of thing. I think I would probably prefer. I don't know that we can say like until we can actually shoot each other, because there could be reasons why one would be better than the other. That just leads us into a strategic discussion, but we have no real meaningful gameplay characteristics yet. So like, I don't know that we can make a decision. I think at this point in the game design process, like any algorithm is as good as any other.
Right.
Yeah, I
think
think
that's the
a
case.
bit like I would say that with this decision depends a lot on how the game is going to start, because if all the players start, like if an instance starts and you have 12 players or whatever start all simultaneously, I would say you would want to have equidistance spawn rate. If this is more of like an ongoing thing where players are joining and leaving and joining and leaving all the time, players are going to be moving around. There's no, it's impossible to have equidistant, because as soon as someone joins, they're going to start moving, and there's going to be clusters of players fighting each other. In that case, just having a minimum spawn distance, I think, makes more sense. Like, just don't spawn too close, spawn them too close to somebody else.
Right.
But you're never going to have equidistant, because as soon as players join, they're going to start moving closer to other players. And so there's no concept of equidistant space between players.
There absolutely is a concept of equidistant. It's mathematical.
No, there is a concept, but let's say, yeah, okay.
So if you jumped into a server where all the players were really close together at the moment you jumped in, equidistant would put you really close to all the other players. If you jumped into a server that was sparse and all the players were really far apart, then you'd end up really far apart from everybody else.
Oh yeah. See, I would say I would not want to spawn like into a cluster of people fighting. I definitely would not want to be doing that in a game.
So you're
Insta
saying
death.
equidistant,
Yeah.
meaning, so Eric, you're saying equidistant as in you'd find the distances between each player to each other player and take the mean of that and make that the distance that the new player. I didn't understand that, like, if all the players are close together, then the new player would spawn.
Well, so if all the players are close together, then you being equally distant from every player means you're likely to be close to all of them. Like in theory, you could be equally distant to all of them and very far away. So that gets us into like the minimum distance thing. So I guess you're right. It doesn't guarantee that you're close to them if just because they're close. But anyway, I think we're kind of spiraling out into like a weird discussion.
It is. I mean, it's kind of relevant to the design though, like because I'm still not sure. Is this game gonna have like a discrete beginning and end where like 12 people start, play for 15 minutes, and then the game ends, and then the next one starts, or is it going to be like a always on kind of like people joining and leaving all the time?
I don't think we're at that point yet either.
Okay, because that would
like
make
we don't
it
know. One could be more fun than the other, or
Right.
or whatever. So I don't think. Like I said before, any distribution mechanism at this point
Mhm.
is equally viable.
Yeah.
And has to be evaluated as like fun or not fun to stick with something that Derek
Yeah, I
says
think
a
that's
lot.
fair.
So let's start with the easiest one to implement, which is the one that's on the screen right now.
Yeah, this is the
As
simplest one
always.
that we could possibly implement, which is like just do it random, and if they end up on top of each other, so be it.
So-
we can get better later.
So one thing I noticed too in your demo is it looked like it spawned the player like up, like off to the side, like where the random position was.
Well, yeah, that's just because I don't understand how your camera stuff was
Yeah,
working, and so
That's-
Go ahead.
Yeah, I would say that's a client improvement we can make, which is basically the camera, the player who, like the first player who's playing is always in the center, like, but the other players, it'll look like they're off to the side.
The
And that's just
camera should ideally be centered on the player.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
Right. So yes, I would agree with you that this is an artifact of the way the camera centering is implemented.
And that's
because-
really easy to do in Phaser. Like we can easily.
Yeah.
It's built into the library. So
Yep.
that's we can put that as a list of client enhancement for post stream.
Yeah.
Man, I had other questions too.
Was it about rotation? Was it
yes,
about...
it was about rotation. Yeah, so you must be synchronizing the rotation between the server and the client.
Yeah, so if we look at the protobuf for box 2D, so
Mhm.
in the protobuf for box 2D, the current angle of the player object is defined.
Mm,
And if we look at the definition in box 2D's documentation, this number is in radians.
gotcha. That was my next question. Perfect.
And
Okay.
so it so happens that Phaser has a set angle and a set rotation.
Mhm.
And so all I do is I take the player body angle, which came in when the update came in via the AMQP message.
Mhm.
And then I just set the rotation to the player body angle. So
Awesome.
it's synchronized to whatever the number is. I don't
Mhm.
know if we're synchronized correctly. So like it does rotate as you saw, but is up on the nose of the ship, really up on the cigar of the box to the object on the server. And I don't actually know the answer to that right now.
Yeah, but you're definitely, I don't think that answers my question, which is like how you're sending the angle to the client so it knows to turn. So
Yeah, that one was actually pretty simple.
cool. Good stuff.
Yes.
It's cool to see the ship turning now. Like,
Yeah.
Now it'll be like, I mean, we needed to do that for adding mouse and touch controls. Like
Absolutely.
the
Yes.
ship can rotate based on wherever your pointer is, to face it. And then we can sync the angle.
Yeah.
That'll be a
you'll have
lot
to-
better than arrow keys.
I don't know, man. I like the retro arrow key style.
Yeah.
It's like old school star control.
You just have to train your brain to know when your ship is pointing down and I want to go forward, I still have to push the up arrow and not the down arrow.
Well, but I mean, that's like, that should be sort of emergently obvious, like up is forward thrust, down is like
You think
backwards
you
thrust.
think it is, but like people, I'm sure some people, like a lot of people would get turned around. Like,
Maybe.
yeah.
Definitely could happen.
Yeah.
Have any of you
rotating
tried
the world
flying?
instead of the sprite?
Yeah.
Say again?
That's always, we could try having the sprite fixed to the screen. So when you press up, you always go this way. And when you rotate your ship on your view, it just
Your
rotates
camera.
the world under it.
That's right. Your camera rotates.
Yeah. That's a more concise way of saying it. Thank you.
Maybe.
Rotate. Yeah. But I think it will be a lot more intuitive when we use pointer controls and you just have a forward thrust and a backward thrust. Like,
Yeah,
Yes.
something like that. Roddy, what were you gonna say about flying?
Oh, have you ever tried to fly radio controlled aircraft? You have
No.
that exact problem. Like you take it off and it's flying this way, and then when it turns around, it's
Mhm,
coming
mhm.
toward you, right?
yes.
So all your controls on the sticks are opposite.
Yes. That's
Same thing with a remote control car. I always used to
Yes.
crash
Yeah.
I used to crash my RC cars all the time because it would be coming back at me
Yep.
and I'd want to go
Right.
left and I'd go right and I'd just drive it under some car on the street and destroy it.
That's a perfect example of
problem.
exactly what I was saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in a top down, so I never had that problem when I was racing at the RC car track because you're standing on the platform above and looking down. And so you left is always left from that perspective. Like, yeah, it's coming at you, but like it's coming at you from under. And so it's intuitively left is left kind of thing. So I don't know. Well, again, this is one of those like game design things. We'll have to try it and see. Anyway.
I think all that goes away when we switch to using pointer controls. Really.
Yeah.
Where was the code that you had up earlier that had the sine and cosine for?
Oh, that was in the server.
I was looking at the repo trying to find it.
Oh, it's in the branch called pod density mass. And it's in
Okay.
B2D pod CPP. Lines 99 to 102.
There we go. Thank you.
Sad RC car stories. Yes, Chris, we all have them.
Me too.
I always bumble through trig on games. It's kind of like, I feel like it kind of works like this and it's not quite right, and just substitute
Kinda work
random
on it until
functions
it
and
works.
eventually it works.
Yeah. My guess with this one is that it's probably like a down is up and a up is down kind of thing.
So they're both being multiplied by the x component.
Yeah, that sounds like it could be a problem.
Yeah. The y thrust is sine and cosine makes sense, I think. That seems right. But the thrust dot y is the sine of the angle times the move dot x. Should that be move dot y?
I don't know if Eric is having connectivity problems.
Uh-oh.
I hope not. It was me last time. But I'm optional. Eric's not.
Is he a little freezy for everyone else?
Yeah.
Okay, not just me. Eric, did you catch that question?
My machine is having a bit of a meltdown. I don't know
Yeah.
if I'm back yet.
We
Yeah,
can hear you
I
now.
hear you. Yeah.
Think so.
Yeah, my load average was like 30.
Huh. That'll do it.
And yeah, what was the question about?
So the
Thrust and-
second line there, thrust.y. Oh, you just switched them a little bit. I was asking about the.
I just reversed them.
Okay. It was the multiplication component on the second line that was the ab2 vec move dot x. It's dot x. for both
Yes,
of them?
and
Is
so
that
the
on purpose?
reason, yes, it's intentional. So if you think about what comes in from the client, right? The way that the client sets direction is if left is down, it sends -1. If right is down, it sends 1. If you're pressing up, it sends
Okay.
-1.
So you only
Oh,
care
this
about
is
if
what's
that makes sense.
backwards. Yeah, this is actually backwards. Why would down
Are you
be
sure?
positive X?
No, it's,
When you're pressing the down key, shouldn't it be negative?
well, I mean,
Like slow down.
that works like when in the client that I have anyway, like I did have to, I thought that too, like originally.
Origin's top left, right? In phaser.
Yeah.
I think that's right.
So
Well,
down
but
is
this
positive
isn't
Y.
phaser, this is Box 2D.
I mean,
This
right.
is-
Yeah, but this is
Oh,
what's
sending,
getting
gotcha.
sent, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, the way it has been sent, like if you push the down arrow.
Right, but we
Right.
changed from apply force to center to apply thrust with
Oh,
sine and
if you
cosine.
change stuff on the server,
as you
yeah,
saw-
it could be backwards.
And as you saw, it was backwards. Yeah.
yeah,
So it's either we have to change this, but to me, this seems backwards. Like if the button press is implying thrust, then up should be more thrust and down should be, backwardsy or whatever. So if I change this to 1 and then change this to -1, what I should get now if I rerun the
that's
server
the X. That's the
is
X
the
direction.
behavior.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
See how that? Yeah, I mean, just
I don't
yeah.
know what I changed and why it's rebuilding, but anyway. So that's there. So if I refresh this. And if I press the up button, it moves to the right, which is fine. What that means is that the rotation of the actual Box 2D object 0 is to the right kind of thing. Like the coordinate system is the problem, if that makes any sense. Does that make any sense? So we applied thrust and it's moving to the right. The sprite is pointing up.
Mhm, mhm.
But if we're applying thrusts using this formula and there's no rotation right now on the object, then that means the thrust is being applied in the direction of 0. So if 0 is to the right,
Oh, I see what you're saying. 0
Then
being like the
the
radian angle of 0.
yeah, so it's basically our sprite isn't aligned with the coordinate system of Box 2D.
Mhm.
So either
Gotcha.
we have to change the sprite default or yeah, man, Sprague, I keep getting this like framing error. Like after the server runs for a little
So
bit.
I wonder,
barfs.
was that a new thing? Because I don't remember
I get
seeing
that. I've always gotten that,
You always
Roddy.
get
Like
that?
ever since I
Yeah,
started using the
I've gotten
server,
it too.
it runs for a while and then it just dies with that.
And I think that's when this happens.
Well, that would happen because it would clear up the resources after the connection drops. Right?
Right, but the weird thing is that it's saying it didn't receive any data within the TTL, but how is that possible? The server's constantly
That's
sending
right.
data.
That's correct.
So
Yeah, that is
unless
weird.
this is the client,
Well, what's 1088.01? 1088 is the
that's my laptop.
Container
It
subnet,
could
isn't
be
it?
the client or the
but isn't it the
server.
contain? Are you running the client containerized? Because I think 1088 is the pod main
No.
subnet.
Right, but one is my laptop, so it could be the game server or the game client.
Okay,
And according to this, we didn't get disconnected. So my guess is it's the server, but it's hard to know because it doesn't log new connections, which is somewhat annoying.
I mean, I'll have
Yeah.
it fail like that when it's just running in the background and the client's not even connected.
because remember in the beginning when it was
Well, when
on
the
stop, there
client's
was
not
no
connected, the
heartbeat.
server isn't sending messages.
Okay. But
Say
we were-
say again,
Right.
Roddy.
I was saying in the beginning, I remember there was an issue on the stomp side where there was no heartbeat on the link, right? And when there was no heartbeat,
Right.
but that was different though because it would just time out. But this is an actual like framing problem from an AMQP point of view. So it's like some packets go awry somewhere, which doesn't make any sense given that it's TCP based, right?
Well, the framing error, I think, is the server's reporting that the connection to the broker was severed in a weird way. And that's why it's a framing error. Because it's clearly saying like
Yeah, in this case,
we
like this
didn't get any
message-
data.
Yeah, this message is likely the client side, right? So because the server is clearly spewing out data nonstop because it's all the physics updates, right? But the client hasn't sent anything back. Because had we not touched the ship that time for 60 seconds,
The client, so which client is this referring to?
the one in the browser,
So 60,000 milliseconds is 60 seconds, isn't
that's
it?
right. So I'm saying is I
Yeah,
think we were
I mean, I had
talking about 60 seconds since we started the move of the ship. And
Oh,
then
I see.
something
I think
timed
I
out
see
that
what you're
shouldn't
saying.
have
Yeah,
timed
yeah,
out.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, in which case then
So
something terminates abnormally. So it shouldn't have timed out, though it did. And then an abnormal termination happens according to the server.
but why would the server care about a random client that gets
Because
disconnected?
there's an exception that's not being handled coming through from Proton. That's my guess personally. There's an error message that's bubbling up and not being caught
Oh, got
properly.
it.
Right?
I mean, it does
And-
say unexpected error.
Right. However, it says exception has occurred and then it says segmentation fault, right? So
Right,
an
but this
exception
is, but it's
occurs and
weird
it's
that it
not caught.
occurs here. I guess this is
For-
just where the program is at the time that it happens.
Right. And if you look in one of
Doesn't
the
mean
other
it actually
threads,
happened
maybe,
in there.
and it doesn't mean that that's the cause. So either way, it sounds like
It looks like,
I need to reproduce and fix.
yeah,
Because the other thing is if you kill off the broker, for example, the server goes down, which is pretty silly, really. But it's just a case of
yeah,
where the disconnection is not being handled properly.
got it. Yeah, so so this was the thread that was paused on the exception. But it's not clear to me from this, like, where it actually is.
Yeah, so it's a segmentation fault. So maybe something happened and exit was called because I noticed in the Proton handling code, if there's an on error handler called at the moment, on transport error called, then exit one is
Mhm.
called. So when exit one is called,
Mm.
that thread immediately exits. And so all the stuff that's defined in main, all the instances become invalid. So if another thread is still trying to run with that data, it's going to be crap. It's going to be,
Got it. No,
you're
that
going to
makes
get
sense.
something
That
bad
makes
happen.
sense. Yeah. So it looks like we need to figure out how to orient, how the sprite should be oriented within the box 2D world. I wish the documentation for any of these things was better. Like,
Is
it's
there a
not
way
clear.
Box 2D to just
Go ahead.
set the angle of vector? I can't find. I see get angle, but I can't find a way to just like give it a vector. 'cause
What
it
are
would
you
be great
trying
if-
to, what are you
if we
trying
could-
to change on the box 2D object?
If we had a thrust vector, that was just like X is 0 and Y is 1. So it's always assumed to be straight up, and multiply that by the force constant. And then we rotate it by the same angle that the ship's already rotated by. Then we don't
Sorry,
have to
rotate
do
what?
the force vector. Because you're doing a manual rotation right now using trig. I feel like that should be in a vector library
No,
already.
no. It's not a, so the trig is applying the force along the direction that the object is pointing.
Yeah.
Because you assume that if you have a object that's shaped like a cigar, the motor's at the back or the thruster's at the back. So if the thing is pointed this way, you can't apply a force in the up one direction.
That's why
You've
I
got to
said
apply the
rotate
force
the thrust
along.
vector.
Yeah, but there is no. You'd
Well, I
have to
think-
do the math on rotating. Like you can't.
That's what you're doing. You're
so-
doing the math on rotating it
But
now.
you can
and I'm saying
probably read
there's-
the rotation and get the vector directly from box 2D and not have to do the trigonometry yourself.
exactly.
I don't see how you cannot do the trigonometry. You have to calculate the force along the direction that the object is pointing. I
Right,
don't
but
understand
you might
how
be able to
you-
retrieve the direction and then still calculate the force and apply it in the direction that you've retrieved.
Yeah.
It's
So
just
there's a
it's a
get-
simplification.
There's a get angle function that you're calling that gives you the radians that the body is rotated. What I'm saying is you can have a vector and you can call a function called set rotation on that vector that will rotate it. So if it's pointed at 0,
I don't-
1, you can rotate it 45 degrees or
But
high radians.
Yeah, I don't think that part is the case, but I think you might be able to simplify the get angle
You don't think that box 2D has that function?
because you
no, because
apply
a
the
vector is
force
not an
and-
object that box 2D cares to manipulate. A vector is an object that box 2D uses to manipulate other objects. So
Right.
you have to apply force using a vector that's already in the correct orientation. If you need to get the vector into the correct orientation, you're doing math, which we're already
What? Okay.
doing.
Well, if that's the case with the tools we're using, that's fine. But what I'm saying is it seems reasonable to expect a vector library to have a function for setting the angle of the vector.
right, but it's not a vector library, it's a physics simulation library.
Well, it's
So you
gotta
can
have a-
retrieve the rotation and you can apply forces, but when you apply forces and torques, it results in new vectors and new rotations. You don't set them directly because that's a kinematic way of thinking, right? So it's one of two things, right? You can physically simulate it using, forces and torques, which is just a rotational force, or you can kinematically animate it to set the rotation, but essentially at which point you turn the physics simulation off to do that manually yourself. So it's two different
But
ways.
it-
Yeah,
of
so
doing it.
here's
it doesn't
the
seem to violate
vector.
the physical simulation if you say, I want to apply a force in this direction, and you created that direction using a vector manipulation function. I don't
But
think
that's literally what, so again,
that's
like,
what you're doing manually.
box
I'm saying
2
there should be a function to do that for you, so we don't have to do the
it
trig
doesn't,
ourselves.
it,
Right. So I think
box
we're
2D
talking
doesn't
past
have,
itself a little bit, right? So
yeah,
in the case of we want to apply a force in the direction that the cylindrical pod is pointing, right? So the thruster's down here on the bottom, the pod's pointing this way. We want to apply a force this way and we want it to move like this, right?
Mhm.
And so the question is, what is the angle? If you look at this triangle, what is this angle right here in this little, if you look at this as a straight line, what's this angle? You need a vector that goes this way so that you apply the force at this vector and it nicely moves straight ahead. Like that's the question being answered by the cosine and sine method, right? Along with the get angle.
yeah, so to simplify it, essentially, the box 2D library has no vector math to manipulate vectors as objects. And so it expects you to do that. So if we want to bring in another vector math library to do what you're suggesting, we could do that. But we've already done what we need to do with the sine and the cosine, which is the vector math.
Well, I thought we were working on that because it wasn't working properly. It was sending the ship to the side.
No, it's
and
not that it's
rotating
not
us.
working. So you have potentially misinterpreted the symptom of the problem, and the actual problem is like, is 0 this way or is 0 this way in the box 2D coordinate system from a radians perspective. It appears that 0 is not in the up direction, but phasors 0 is in the up direction. So we just have to figure out which up is up in which system and then start with them pointed in the same direction. I couldn't care less if up was this way. I just need to know which way it is in both coordinate
But it
systems,
needs to be
because we have two
consistently up.
different coordinate systems
Yeah,
that
that's
are
right.
potentially not behaving the same. Like they could be rotated by 90 degrees, they could be out by 180 degrees. It appears that they're rotated by 90 degrees. So it wasn't the force that was the problem. It
I
was
see.
the force is being applied directly, but the way that it moves in the coordinate system wasn't what we expected. So that means that the actual rotation of the thing is here. So we just need to change where the phasor sprite is pointed when it starts, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Or we need to change the starting rotation of the pod when we initialize it. Also could not care less. Roddy, you're probably the box 2D guru. Should we change the phasor sprite, or should we
If
change
the
the
math
pod
here is
initialization?
correct, then we should change the phasor sprite because the display should reflect the simulation, not the other way around.
I
Do we
like
want the
that
ship
idea.
starting pointing
So
to the side though? So it seems like we do want it pointed up, right?
does it really matter?
Not
What
necessarily.
is up in
Um,
space, really?
That's right.
I mean,
I know the enemy's gate is down.
Yeah.
How do we convert radians to degrees?
Math. Unless you have a library.
You kidding? Really? All the math?
All
1
math.
radian is 57.29 degrees. That is a stupid ass number that does not help me at all. Well, because the problem is that we're 90 degrees out, like almost exactly. So
If you want to convert to degrees, it's are you
The instant answer there has the formula.
yeah, it's 180 divided by pi times the radian.
right, but the challenge here is that we need to rotate. Oh, but I can do this. Hang on. Does phasor have a get rotation? No, the body already has an angle. All right, hang on a second. I need to hack on some stuff here real quick. Basically, I'm gonna just add an extra rotation to the object. And that'll fix all our problems. Here we go. I want a breakpoint here. All right, so we have player sprite angle. Angle is
Body
0.
angle.
Okay, so
Oh, does the body have the right angle? Sometimes I get confused about whether phasor syncs the sprite and the body. I think if you set the body, it copies it to the sprite, but not the other way around or something like that. Anyway, that's
And
probably
there is a
not-
beat.
so does the sprite have a body?
the sprite, the physics group.
I don't know. But anyway, so we need to rotate this 90 degrees and the angle is 0. So if we do player sprite set angle to player sprite, oops, that's fine. Player sprite angle plus 90. what do we get? Oh, I have to play it. Didn't actually do anything.
So in the box 2D library, there is a B2 math header that does have a B2 rotation struct where you can construct it via the angle and radians. And then after that, you can take back out the X and Y axes based on that.
I don't actually know what you just said.
Later, there may be a simplification on the sine and cosine part in the server code. Essentially what I said.
So now I'm just basically adding 90 degrees of rotation in actual degrees, not radians, to whatever it already has, and we'll see if it starts in the right place. Are you running? I guess you are running. Hey, look at that. And so now if I hit up, why is it not doing anything? Oh, is it paused?
Yeah.
Zoom. Yay. Turn. Oh yeah, look at it turn. Turn so fast. Someday it'll finish turning. Doesn't really look like it's moving in the direction of the thrust
It
though.
does.
Yeah, I guess it is kind of going down. If I turn
Yeah.
it more. Right, now I'll apply more force. Is it going in the, yeah, yeah, that's a spaceship flying right there. Look at that. That's some amazing stuff. I did it.
So if you can you
Cool,
turn back
alright.
to the left now? Try turning back to the left.
Someday, maybe. Ooh, now I'm going backwards.
I think there's still some things swapped, some values swapped somewhere.
It appears that the torque is not being correctly negated because both left and right turn me in the same direction.
Yeah, there's some. Yeah, just I think this can be more
So,
trial and error. Yeah.
yeah. Torque applied, config Y. So this, I mean, this should be a negative number.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. There he goes. Goodbye.
Physics simulation is killing his laptop.
Hmm.
Screen's moving around.
I think I'm back. My
Yeah,
machine
you're back.
definitely
Hey.
You're
is
back.
melty.
Oh. We lost you again for huh.
Am I back?
Yes.
Yeah, so there's some issue with the torque. it does not appear to be applying torque in the opposite direction. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Because we're
Something
sending
swap.
negative and positive. So I don't think it's a swap issue. So somehow we're not getting a negative number. Or I thought I had changed that to not be divided by 2. Yeah, I mean, I can try, I would try to log it, but my machine is so like dying.
Yeah, I think we
Probably
just,
just gonna make it worse.
it's good to see the demo of like turning and moving and applying the force in the direction it's
Yeah.
pointed. That's cool already. Like, I think this kind of thing is just, you'll be able to figure it out after just setting breakpoints and tweaking stuff.
Yeah. So I think the next, let's see, I did left and it said, handle pod updated event, command consume, update, apply forces. Stop the server here. Current angle. There we
Yeah,
go.
like what might be handy here is like a local display from the server of just the box 2D simulation and show the vectors on the body and the shapes as far as box 2D is concerned. And then you could compare the client against what box 2D thinks, because often they're not necessarily one and the same, right?
Sorry, say that again.
So like if you look at the way some of the stuff that we looked at before for box 2D shows the simulation, it's literally just shapes, right? It's just lines, boxes, circles, and then their corresponding vectors, right? So like you can have your graphical display of your client, and you can have your box 2D display of what it thinks is the state of the world and all the shapes it's simulating. And you can realize like, hey, over here, these vectors are not pointing in the right directions, that the way we're looking at them over here. So you can see that there's a disconnect, and it helps you identify what the problem might be.
Shouldn't that be in the client though?
Sure,
Like,
if we want to spend the
otherwise we're
time to
basically building
withdraw,
another
yes,
client.
but it depends on which way it's quicker to do it, right? Like you already have the simulation data on the server side. So it may be very quick to do, but at the same time, yes, I agree in the having it in the client and being able to hit a little button and say, let's see the physics simulation, that would be ideal.
I mean, wouldn't it be faster to display information that's already there
Oh, it's already
on
there on the server
the
too.
client than it would be to build a new client of the server?
Not necessarily. You could have it debug mode where you had it built directly in and just directly use some box 2D. Like there's a box 2D draw debug example that you could probably integrate and just run it with like a head, like the server with an option to for the display. In the long term, though, thinking it through, it's not going to work because, of course, we're going to containerize it, and we want as less surface area as possible, right? From a pod main, from a container point of view, we won't need any of that stuff. But it might be a short
Yeah,
path
the challenge we have, it's funny, it's like Phaser actually already does some of that, except that we're not using Phaser for physics.
That's right, because the physics
So
actually
we end
happens
up
elsewhere.
not,
That's right.
right. So we end up not being able to use a bunch of that.
That's right.
So we have to,
That is the trade-off.
yeah. But the other thing is that like, box 2D wouldn't be able to display the thing that we're doing because that just comes in as numbers. Like how would we display the torque
You can
that
draw it
we're
as a vector that's
applying?
pointing in a certain direction and on a certain point on the body that's being simulated from the box 2D point of view. Because like you've got your polygon,
Yeah,
and clearly it's being applied somewhere on that polygon, right? So there's a point where that gets applied, and then there's a value. So you could draw the length of your vector as the value and the magnitude, right?
yeah,
And
no,
so
that
as
makes
that
sense.
changes
I'm
over
just trying to
time,
figure
you
out
can
how
see
you would,
like, see if I can get a good,
I'm just trying to
picture.
figure out how you would do that on the client side. Because the math and the calculations are being done on the server side. So you'd have to send those back to the client
yeah, that's right. So on the
and
client
then
side, in
have the
that case, then
client
you don't
be able
necessarily
to
have the
display them.
information you need to do that. That's correct.
So like when real people that build real video games for a real living, for their real families to put real food on their table, what do they actually build like an extra game server client to show that stuff? Like if you're building, you know, the next shooter game, like what,
Yeah, but
how do they debug stuff?
well, sometimes you do have to build in another, what is essentially a client, but you don't care about everything. But in this case, it's not really a client because we just said the client is not receiving all the information from box 2D. It's just receiving what it needs to know, right? So you could simply write something that talks to box 2D and displays everything it knows about. But that is an extra add-on to the server, which is essentially something that's only for debug purposes. But yes, people do spend quite a bit of time writing their own debug tools typically when creating games. So there often is a lot of custom
Yeah.
work to create tools to help you build the game.
Yeah,
And certainly if you're doing it from scratch, like often you don't have a choice, right? Like when we did Gigawater back in 2011, and we had a physically simulated two-dimensional rig of a body. Like I just wrote the tools to display the body, and I wrote a little GUI on the side to be able to, in real time, manipulate the joint data and to be able to tweak it because there was no way to know like what was going to feel good when you had your phone in your hand and you're reading data from the accelerometer and you're feeding data into your physics model. And at the end of the day, you wanted it to feel good and play good. Like there's no correct definition of what feels good and plays good, right?
yeah. Let's see, torque applied. Well, it says it applied a negative torque. So I don't know why it didn't rotate the right way.
Is it, let's see, you're sending degrees now, right? I'm just
So it
wondering if
doesn't
there's if there's a
send
mod
any,
happening.
so it sends a negative number, or it sends -1 or +1
Mhm.
for either the up, down or the left, right. And so the Y is the turning. And so we have a -1 for Y, we multiply by the force multiplier, we divide by 2, and then that's the torque that we're applying to the body. But it didn't appear that it was rotating it the correct direction. So let me try something different here. there's definitely something weird is going on with the physics, basically. So if I press left, I mean, it's slowly spinning to the left. If I press right, I think it just takes forever and a day for the new, because it's basically overcoming the inertia. Yeah, it's finally starting to turn right. So that was a wild goose chase.
No, it's pretty typical in most
Um,
physics engines, right? And a lot of games kind of fake their values to get around those things, but they produce wonky results.
mhm. Yeah, so the part of the challenge that I was trying to figure out was basically like, so apply torque, if we go back to the box2D reference, apply torque affects the angular velocity without affecting the linear velocity of the center of mass. And so I really don't think apply torque is like the thing we want to be using. We really do want to be applying a force, but the challenge is we have to calculate the point at which to apply the force. But this point is it's the documentation doesn't make sense to me. It says the world position of the point of the application. But like the world position, meaning the position in the actual game world or the position on the actual object. And so you can do stuff like get a local point relative to the body's origin given a world point. So like I couldn't figure out like what series of stupid math I had to do to figure out like where the end of the spaceship
Right,
is.
because there's a series of transformations to get
And
from
that gets
screen
us back to
space
the debug thing
Yeah.
where it's like when you're debugging, you can't actually use this function. So then I had to like go and look at like the box2D source code in like body and then like figure out like, you know, get position and like look at the function like, oh, it's returning this value. So I have to like then go back to the debugger and see what that value, you know what I
Right.
mean? I still couldn't figure out like what I actually had to do.
Yeah. And so this
So
is a
maybe,
common problem with a lot of game development, right? Is like if you're looking at a simulation, which parts need to be simulated and which parts need to be faked. And for most things, including flight sims, they're actually faked because writing a series of control programs for thrusters and simulating those thrusters in addition is going to be very complicated and time consuming versus just saying we're just going to apply a rotation and then recalculate physics afterwards. And so for our particular circumstance, we may want to avoid as much, you know, physics type work, right? Allow that to inform and be applied on top of what's currently happening. But when we're talking about rotating the ship or doing movement or things like that, we may want to skip the physics simulation itself because there's a lot of things involved in flight simulator mechanics when you're even looking on a 2D playing field of thrusters, right? Like you don't want to apply maximum force immediately. That's not going to actually get the desired result that a user's, you know, expecting. So your thruster is going to have to ramp over time. You're going to have to modulate that. You're going to have to automatically, you know, handle edge cases about rotation or movement where the user's kind of out of control of the ship, right? Like those are all things to consider, and we can just kind of throw them out the window if we just fake it.
I think that would change a lot of
faking
the
it would
server
require build.
changes. Yeah.
Well, no, it wouldn't. I mean, faking it would just require designing the faker math. And so which is easier, like figuring out where to apply the force on the body or writing fake math to figure out how quickly to turn the body
Yeah.
based on the fact that the player is pressing the turn button.
I think that math is pretty simple, like fake math. Like simple equation.
You think it's simpler than figuring out like functions that already exist in the physics simulation library? Like it's literally just a matter of figuring out like which 3 functions to use to get the number of where to apply the force that we've already done the shit math on.
Yeah, I mean the math for rotating stuff, right, is pretty relatively simple. And that's not the issue there, right? It's if we're using the box 2D force and all this other stuff, right? It adds a lot more complications. It makes things a lot harder to control. I mean, we can do it, right? We can write code that handles thruster simulation and knows how to ramp each one up and which one to fire when based on user input. But I don't know that we need to.
Hey, Eric, can you explain again why the apply torque function isn't appropriate here? Like, why do you need to apply it to a specific point on the ship?
So because I don't know the answer. It seems wrong based on the way that it's working. And so given the fact
So
that
you
it's
wanna try
not
something
behaving in a
else.
way that's expected. Well, it already appears to be wrong. So I think trying to do the right thing, which is what a thruster would actually do, which is, apply force to a point on the thing, seems like the logical thing to do. The only reason I did apply torque was because it was a proof of concept. Like, okay, this will make it turn. Great, success. Like, not the right thing to do. The right thing to do is apply force. The question is, how do we calculate
Yeah.
this is a documentation problem. Like, I've spent more time trying to figure out, as a person who doesn't know how to debug C++, what world point means than like probably it would take Roddy like 10 minutes to actually figure it out, since he's worked with this before. You know what I'm saying? Like, anytime I do something, it's going to take 15 times longer than it would take somebody that actually knows what they're doing,
Or has
because I'm
Yeah.
learning it
before
while
at
I'm
least,
figuring
right?
it out.
Yeah, exactly. It's
I mean,
just the
yeah.
experience factor.
Yeah. And in this case, like, I think you're actually right on if you're wanting to simulate the whole thing, which normally, like, I don't, right? When I write game engine stuff, I do not physics simulate everything. I don't physics simulate movement. I only physics simulate portions of it that need to, seem realistic or interact realistically, that are too hard to, write a ton of math for. So in this case, like, I'd just be, setting a transform, right, on that rigid body multiple times a frame based on how the rotation should be, and then relying on the physics engine just to do collision calculations instead of full movement. But if you want to do full movement, I would say torque is correct. And the way you should be applying it is you should be calculating the distance, like rotation wise, that's needed, like however many, radians or whatever, and then multiplying that by the torque that you need. And then you should be interpolating that. You should be slurping that essentially between zero torque, maximum torque, and then lowest amount of torque as it's getting to the destination point, if that makes sense. So your torque shouldn't be constant. It should be interpolated between a smooth ramp from starting to maximum to ending, so that you don't overshoot your destination.
You have combined many, many, many design tropes into that description. And so in that, if we were actually doing a simulation, if we were using like real rocket thrusters, they would come on fairly close to instantly, and you would inevitably end up overshooting because you have inertia, and so on and so forth. And so what you're describing is gamey fake physics, even in what sounded like an attempt to describe real physics. Like,
well, that's kind of what it is, right? You're simulating things, right? So you're kind of into that rabbit hole of how much do you have to simulate to get this to play nicely, right? And my answer to that almost always is don't, because it's a lot of work and it's very time consuming. Unless you're getting a lot of gain from it, there's not necessarily a reason when you could just go in and just set the transform on the body every frame.
I'm super confused, because you're talking about designing fake physics being less time consuming than applying a force using the simulation engine that already knows how to do all that.
Yes, because
like,
the
it's literally
simulation
3 lines of code
doesn't-
versus like,
it's the same 3 lines of code no matter what you're doing. The problem is when you start getting into simulating physics, you have to write additional code to make things behave how a player would expect. It's why if you stick like, a firecracker on, a little paper box or something like that, right? It's not going to be a control mechanism.
Yeah, I think the words that you're using to describe what you're trying to say imply to me the exact opposite of what I think you're trying to imply. Like, we're not writing anything to simulate physics. Box2D already does that. So like, quite
Right.
literally, it's the player hit the button. We've already decided via some fake back of the envelope math, like what the force should be. So just apply the force to the right place on the cylinder, and it's going to rotate, and it'll keep rotating until they press the other button to make it stop rotating.
Can I take a shot?
That seems very, very, yeah, go for it, Michael.
I think my take on what Derek was saying is that using the physics simulation, he wasn't saying that's hard, that's easy, but then making it playable on top of that is hard.
Yes.
And it is easy, if you want to get to a playable state, it's easier to skip the physics engine for the things that you can skip it for and just apply a transform directly. And an example that I've done is gravity seems like a fun game mechanic, but it's actually not fun. And most games have really, really slow gravity. And if you see a game that actually applies real gravity, it looks fake because it's so unnatural. Like things just go bam. They hit the ground so hard and so fast. Or if it's a space game, you get like sucked into the black hole way faster than you want to. And so it just feels better in the game to use a basic acceleration, like a much slower acceleration toward a point than like true gravity.
Yeah, there's
Right,
a ton
like-
of examples like that, like where real physics would not make for fun, like a fun play experience. Like, and I mean, even the games that we've written are like the flying games that we've written, like Tracer and Zorbio. Like, there's zero physics in either of those games. It's all done just by, vector math, and the vector math is pretty simple. Like, it's just you're going to move forward this many. Like, if you're pressing forward or left or right, you're going to just use the vector to turn it one way or the other. Just basically simulating movement, but then the thing that it gives you is like total control of how you would want your user experience to be without having to work around all the physics, the rigidness of like true physics.
Right. The question that I'm talking about here is like, why does applying torque not make, easy turning, and, why doesn't it feel right in the game? Right. And the answer to that is because you have to do math in between to make that apply in the way you think it would work. Like there's a gap between, what you would expect to see in the game versus how physics actually work. And so you have to write the code to do that translation for the user. So
I think it's actually, I think it's actually that applied torque doesn't do in real physics land what we think it's doing, which is why it behaves weird. It's like opening the door from the hinge versus opening the door from the doorknob. Like, apply torque is opening the door from the hinge, and apply force is opening the door from the doorknob, but we don't actually know where the doorknob is to apply the force.
Yeah, and you do need to multiply by inertia
I think it would,
to make that make sense, right? Like, I think that's something that was missing from your code, is multiplying the angular velocity by the inertia to get it closer to like what you would expect it to act like.
if you say so. I feel like we've spent more time debating on why apply torque is or is not the right thing to do versus like we could have written the 3 lines of code that actually did the right thing. But whatever. We can write a fake physics engine, but which one of the 5 of us is going to do that, and by when?
Oh, it's not a physics engine.
Like, would you rather have something that's like accurately simulated and not as much fun and finished, or something
It may
that's
be
like
more fun.
theoretically amazingly fun, but never actually gets done.
Well, no, it's not. It's not writing. I don't think we're talking about writing a physics engine. It's like writing your gameplay to kind of feel like you're in space, but is not like true physics. Or like it could be as simple as
Uh,
you putting your velocity as a function of the direction that you place times the speed. Like like whatever that speed is or the direction is, you start going in that direction. Like it's a super simple mathematical equation, but it's not physics. It's just movement. Like,
Yeah, I mean it's the difference between needing to write. We're just talking about here, Eric, is if you're applying the torque, right? You have to calculate your current angle, your desired angle, get the rotation from that, multiply by the inertia, right, with against the velocity, and then apply that torque. And then assumably, right, you might have to tweak that a little bit by getting something closer to what a user would expect. Versus if you're not doing the physics thing, right, all you're doing is using the set transform. That's one line of code. Like whatever the angle is that you want to rotate the ship to at that particular frame, you just set transform and there's no physics happening. That's all we're talking about is the difference between those two when you're talking about like writing code and making it work. Does that make sense?
Right, but it does, but you're leaving out the part where you figure out where you want the ship to end up, which is code also, and or math. And so again, this is all
You
like,
have to do that either way.
I'm more than happy to make it do whatever you want it to do, but somebody's got to write that.
Yeah, makes sense
Who's
to
going
me.
to be?
yeah, that's the question, right? whoever's doing the work gets to decide.
I think that's a fair statement.
Yeah.
And so right now, like I'm the one who's been doing most of the work for this stuff. So if
Correct.
I don't know how to do any of what you just described, but I can read documentation and this is documented. So like I can make something that's not fun and doesn't play well, but works.
And to be fair,
if
it mostly
Somebody else
works.
doesn't actually write
It's just
code. Like,
not quite there,
Yeah.
right?
Huh?
Yeah.
It mostly works. Like it's most of the way to where you need it to be, but there's some discrepancy involved in what's happening that makes it not quite right at the moment.
Yeah.
right. And I mean,
So the
like
question
I
is, how
can
do we
fudge
identify what the discrepancy
apply
is?
torque. Well, again, now we're back in a circle to, I don't think apply torque is the right tool to be using for the job. I think we
That's
should
right.
be applying the force at the end of the unit,
Right.
which brings us back to, I just didn't get enough time to debug how to actually
Right.
calculate where
And
the end
I
of the
think
ship is.
I think that's the answer right there. You didn't have enough time to debug the problem. So we don't know what the answer is based upon the
Yeah.
current structure and design of what you've implemented, right? So maybe with 5 minutes or maybe 2 hours, who knows, you'd be able to identify, or I would be able to identify how to fix it to act as we expect and would be correct according to like what we're visually seeing, right?
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, that might not still be fun. That's a completely independent question from making it work relatively correctly, right?
Yeah. So true.
And so I think Derek's point was spot on in that, like physically simulating stuff does take some effort, and is not necessarily doesn't directly equate to any fun factor, right? But I also agree with Erik in that we're saying the code we have here that he wrote is pretty close to working, and with a little bit of extra effort, could be physically accurate, if not necessarily fun. And I think
Yeah.
the small window of taking what we have and making it work is the next step.
Yep. Totally. Yeah. Like I could think of it as another example. Like there's of a really good example I can think of a mixture of real physics and fake physics, making for a really fun game experience is this sailing game that I'm playing, like where it's a first person game where you're on a boat, right? And there's a really cool physics simulation with the waves and like the boat. And the boat has mass and stuff, and it moves, it stops slowly and stuff. But if you drop the sails and you're against the wind, the boat's still going to move forward, because it would be fun if the boat just sat there. Like in real physics, like that boat wouldn't move, would do nothing. But in a game, you're going to drop the sails. The player is going to want to like start to move. So that's like, so they have to fake that, right? That's obviously a game mechanic they faked around the real physics engine, where anytime your sails are down, you're moving forward. Doesn't matter what way the wind is coming. Like, and so that's just an example of like, fake physics making for a fun experience.
Yeah,
It's
you're
not-
talking about like Sea of Thieves here.
It's Sea of Thieves, yeah.
Yeah, so it's fuzzy because it's been a long time since I've watched the presentation, but I'm pretty sure they actually do very little physics, and it's actually a bunch of really cool immersion tricks. Like essentially, they're just calculating like an average vector based on the wave input, right? And that's just a sine wave. They don't even like use the actual geometry. So like what's going on is just like an approximation of
It's
it.
all-
Where they
it's
do
all
the
fake,
physics, when they do the physics calculation is like only for collisions pretty much. And then a couple of places to like derive a reasonable-ish number to put into the non-physics driven simulation. So
Yeah, there's
game
definitely-
design and development is always like this really weird mix of like, oh God, what is the right approach to this? And there isn't always a correct answer to it.
Yeah. I think it's a great example of showing like both using both fake and real physics for making a really fun game experience. Like it's a quite fun game. I like it a lot, but it definitely does have physics though, and that's fact with collisions, because sometimes if you bump into something the wrong way, the physics engine freaks out and the boat goes flying like 100 feet in the air and spins through the sky. It's pretty hilarious. Yeah. But I think like this is a pretty small prop. We kind of got into more just like theory and general discussion, but I think for like turning the ship,
I think what it comes down to simply is amount of time and effort
Yeah.
expended on the problem. Like
Yeah.
Erik has expended a bunch of time on it. And like Mike has, I haven't expended any in this round. And I think a little bit of time and attention to the problem would help solve it.
I mean, the hackiest solution would be, let me look at the numbers we had written down. I don't actually remember, Derek, what you like how fast you said you wanted the ship to basically be able to turn around. And so the hackiest way to do that is to just take that number and then divide by the game tick rate. And then if the thruster's on in whatever direction it is, just move it by that many degrees.
Yeah.
And then like there's no inertia. It's just,
Yeah, and Box 2D
Exactly.
does like that set transform function is essentially the way to do that in Box 2D, right? You provide the position vector, which is just going to be the same as always, right? And then you just increment the angle by that number every time, and that's in radians.
So did we have some rough notes? Refresh my memory. Did we have some rough notes on, because I know Derek, you had some specific ideas laid out in our previous discussion over as to how this works.
Yeah.
Did we have rough notes for reference?
I did take notes somewhere.
Okay. Like maybe
I
you can
don't
dump them
have
in
the
design
rotation number
doc
written down.
or something like that for reference. I mean, even if they're just scratch.
So looking at set transform, we're gonna have the exact same problem, which is set the position of the origin and rotation. Position is the world position of the body's local origin. So what is that? It's literally the same problem as the last problem, which was like figuring out
You just
origins,
call body, get
world,
position.
local.
right?
Yeah. You don't even need to calculate it. You just ask the body for its current position because you're not changing its position. You're just changing the angle.
Get the world body origin position. Set the world position of the body's origin. Okay, so then set transform, the position would just be get position, like
Yep.
set it to its own position.
Exactly.
Plus
And
the
then the rough
rotation.
number I
And the
had was
angle would just be
180
some
degrees.
calculated number.
Yeah.
So- exactly.
We had 180 degrees
180
in 4
degrees
seconds.
what?
In 4 seconds.
Okay, I just made a rough note.
And what's the server, the theoretical server tick rate? Because we have the sleep, so should it be influenced by the sleep cycle then?
No, because this is defining the feel, right? The ship should turn 180 degrees in 4 seconds when you're running the game. So
But how do you
basically,
know,
regardless of what
how
your
do you know
display
how
speed is,
long 4 seconds is?
according to, if we're using the simulation, then you'd say 4 seconds of simulated time. But what you get as a frame rate may be completely independent of what you've calculated underneath the hood.
Sorry, I don't really understand the answer. So how,
Because often it's the
but
case
if you're
that-
saying 180 degrees in, sorry, go ahead.
So for any given game that actually uses some sort of physics simulation, or whether that's like a box of, I'm not gonna use the word box, a collection of formula that you've derived yourself for how you would like the rotation to feel, it's quite often the case that your physics simulation runs at a completely different rate than your display, right? And what you're drawing to the screen and how often you're taking input,
Sure.
right? So in this case, let's just say that this is specifically 180 degrees in 4 seconds of calculated time with regards to either the physics simulation or the non-physics simulation of position and movement. And if you have a client which displays that in 15 frames per second, you're still only getting 60 frames of that rotation in that change from its initial rotation to 180 degrees in the difference.
Did I not push those changes?
I think they're still on the branch. I had to grab the branch to look.
They're not, I thought you had merged it to master. Did I not?
I
guess
merged
didn't PR
the-
them.
Nope, that's right. You didn't send a PR. So I did the 2 PRs, which were the leave command on the server side and the
Got it. Okay.
and the logging and the UUID update or whatever it was.
Yeah, so like I understood what you said this second time around. I still don't understand how I would calculate.
What we were talking about to begin with, based upon the coordinate systems.
I mean, can't you base that off?
No,
of
the
server tick?
rotation.
Can't you know how long each server tick is? Like,
On the server side, you would, yeah.
I mean.
I mean,
can-
technically on the client
yes,
side,
well,
you
the
could
server
inform the
side
client
is-
too.
Right, the server side is the master.
Well, but the server side is what's doing the rotation.
Right.
That's right.
So since you know how long each server tick is, and it's 20 times per second, and you want to move it 180 degrees in 4 seconds, you can use that's just algebra. Like, figure out what you have enough variables to figure out how much to move it in each tick.
Right. And the server can easily inform the client of what the tick rate is.
Well, the client doesn't care what the tick rate is because the server is what's rotating the object and just telling
Right,
the
but
client
the-
what the new angle
Right,
is.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, so that's how I would
All
say
right, so
doing that.
So much math
Okie dokie.
involved in game dev.
There is a lot
Yeah.
of math involved in game dev. It's pretty much unavoidable.
Yeah,
Hmm
pretty much. And I would also
cool.
say,
Well,
like,
somehow we
this-
managed to
one thing-
spend an
one
hour and a
thing I-
half talking about nothing other than rotating the ship.
Can I say
Which is
something?
really
Go ahead,
fast for
Jared.
game dev, honestly.
This
Normally that's like a week-long discussion.
God, no wonder games never get developed. Go ahead,
Mhm.
Jared.
Yeah, okay. I would say as much of this kind of like hard-coded values we should put into the config variables as possible. Like 4 seconds, like turn, I would call that turn rate, right? Let's put turn rate into a variable. We can say like, what if we wanted to turn faster? What if we have smaller
Yeah, that's
chips that
fine.
turn
I mean,
faster?
eventually it'll get there. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
no, I
that's
mean, I think we
45
should just
degrees in
start
a
doing
second,
that.
right?
Like we should just start doing that as a habit when we're hacking on the server and we're gonna put like a 4 second turn rate. Like don't hard code it. Just start out with a config variable. It's so easy to do. Just put it in there.
Yeah, no, makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, it's not that easy because you have to add it as a command line variable and a config, and you have to edit the config instance to actually pull in the value and so on and so forth. So it's definitely, it's not hard, but it's non-trivial. There's a lot of steps.
We should try to, maybe we can make that a bit simpler process. It'd be nice if there was some sort of like reflection in C++ or something where you could just add it to a constant, like a constant struct or something, and then it just shows up everywhere else. So we don't have to add this set of if statements that we have here.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
it's more,
the
it's
20
more even than the set of if statements. It's
Yeah.
like a bunch of stuff.
I know that.
It's a bunch
Yeah.
of plumbing to get the
Right.
data from the config to where it needs to be, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there are C++ reflection libraries and
Mm-hmm.
headers and stuff you can get out there. Although from a native guy's point of view, reflection is very faux pas because it's a performance killer, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
But in this case, ultimately, I think we are more interested in the speed of development rather than the ultimate frames per
Yeah.
second.
And we're in kind of a
creating,
weird
right?
situation too, where honestly, I couldn't give you an answer if it would be faster to write all this code in C++ and then, add client side prediction later. And that'll, we'll just rely on like low latency to the server to keep things functional because this is a demo. Or if it would be better to look at something like running JavaScript on the server for only specifically the simulation stuff. So we can write code once and then deploy it to both client and server. But I'm thinking honestly, just for demo purposes, we don't need to add that much client prediction, right? It's just
Yeah.
there's lag, there's latency, right? Or just like, hey, this is a
Yeah.
demo. We didn't write any client side prediction because that would take a month to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah. No, I agree with that. That's really complicated too. Can be.
Building a game 3 hours a week at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A multiplayer scalable game, which is super.
Yeah,
complex.
3 hours a week at a time. All right.
Yeah.
Anybody got any parting thoughts for the last 40 seconds of today? Oh, geez.
Lots of work to do, I think, is the parting thought. I think the more we discuss, the more we realize, of course, that there is a lot of work that goes into these things outside of just our core knowledge area of infrastructure and getting things deployed on OpenShift, but actually building something that's valuable to deploy on OpenShift to begin with is a time-consuming task in itself.
Absolutely.
Well, and we're like not even remotely close to there, right?
That's right. Do not
We're still
underestimate what
in-
it takes to develop a game.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Unless
least
you're
the
doing
client
a
server game.
weekend game jam, then anyone can do it in one weekend.
Right, but they don't necessarily do multiplayer games in a
I
weekend
know.
from
Well, I
scratch.
do. I did. We did.
Well, you're special.
Yeah.
All right, dudes. Well, thanks for
All
joining
right.
today. Oh man, has the stream been working the whole time? I hope it has been. I think it
Yeah,
has.
no,
Yeah,
I've
that's
had
it.
it up.
All right.
All right.
Cool. Okay.
Hey, folks,
It looked
see
black
everyone.
for a second.
All right.
See you
ya.
next month.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers.